I've always believed that leaders are not anointed by titles or responsibilities or tenure, but instead are those who bring energy, focus, and compassion to everything they do. So I've decided to put a spotlight on those who are using their unique leadership style to inspire change and drive meaningful action. Join me for a series of powerful conversations that will leave us all thinking about what it means to truly lead. Up next in the series is a guest who defines leadership in every sense of the word. Dr. Cheri Blauwet is the Chief Medical Officer at Spaulding Rehabilitation Network and an Associate Professor in Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation at Harvard Medical School. She's also an 8-time marathon winner and represented the United States at 3 Paralympic Games, bringing home a gold, a silver, and 5 bronze medals. And if that weren't enough, most recently she was named the newest chair of the Board of Governors of the Boston Athletic Association, the organization responsible for hosting the historic Boston Marathon. Join me as Cheri and I discuss her leadership philosophy and her vision for the future of a greater inclusion in sports. All right. Well, Dr. Blauwet, thank you for being here. I appreciate you coming and how busy you are. In fact, my intro of you took it might be longer than this interview, to be honest with you. But if we could start, just take us back to beginning. Talk a little bit about your journey all the way through. How did you find a passion for racing? And then how did you transition that into becoming, a world-class Olympic athlete? And just some of the things like what did you learn about yourself along the way?
Yeah, thank you. I love talking about this journey, and it has been a journey. Yes. So obviously I'm based in Boston now, have the honor of chairing the BAA, but I'm not a native New Englander. I grew up in a small farming community in the Midwest, and I was injured. I acquired a spinal cord injury at around 20 months as a result of a farming accident. And so growing up in a pretty rural area with a disability as a wheelchair user, it took me quite a long time to find sports. So as I was going into elementary school and even into junior high, I didn't self-define myself as an athlete, right? I didn't think about having an athletic identity. I was doing other things, but much of that was because I had never discovered a way to engage and a way to get involved. So when I was in 8th grade, our high school track coach, he went to the Iowa State girls high school track meet, and he saw there were some wheelchair racing events happening at that track meet. And he came back to school and he said, "Cheri, I just saw this thing, wheelchair racing. You want to try it?" And I said, "No, thanks. I'm good." Because I'd never played sports. I didn't think I would be excited about it or interested in it. But it goes back to that whole mantra, like you can't be what you can't see, right? And I had never seen anybody with a disability competing. Right. So he talked me into coming out for the team the next year, and I grabbed a jersey, showed up for practice, started to wheel laps on the track while everyone else ran laps around me.
And you were the only one?
I was the only wheelchair user.
Yeah.
Started to go to some of the local track meets. Frankly, wasn't having much fun at all because it was isolating, right? So I was part of the team, but not really part of the team. And it really wasn't competitive. I was mostly racing the clock and myself. So at the end of that season, I was actually ready to call it quits. I said, okay, I've given this a try. I've appeased this coach. And then we went to that high school state track meet in Des Moines. And I wheeled out onto the track and saw several other teenage girls my age who were competing in this sport and who had actual racing chairs. And I was immediately intrigued. And I was intrigued because the racing chairs looked cool, and I wanted to try that. Right. But I was even more intrigued because I had never really been part of a social community with other peers and adolescents with disabilities. And so the moment I met them, I wanted to be their friend because I had never been able to kind of find that common bond or that common community of people who really understand the lived experience of being a wheelchair user, where you can, crack wheelchair jokes and use self-deprecating humor. So met these girls, wanted to join the team, and found out that there was a wheelchair racing team that trained. There was one in Des Moines and one in Minneapolis, and started to go to those practices on the weekends, which was about a 4-hour drive one way from our family farm in Northwest Iowa. But again, because of that social community, because of making these friends, I was started to get really excited about it. And kept going. And slowly but surely, once I started to go to those practices, then I actually started to acquire skill. I got a racing chair that fit well, started to train under a coach who really understood the sport. and started to truly compete. With that, my interest and attachment to the sport started to transition from like being social to really being competitive, right? And then I started to get that competitive energy and want to win. And so continued to compete through high school, ended up seeking out the opportunity to compete in college as well. Started to train with a collegiate level coach and that collegiate level teammate. Then I started to really increase in skill, and that's where I qualified for my first Paralympic Games, and then really started to become known nationally and internationally in the sport. So I wasn't like born on some pedestal, right?
Yeah,
I didn't start when I was a toddler. It really was like a slow, steady journey. Yeah. And I always say, like, thank goodness for that coach, right, who took a chance.
Just to get you started, take a chance on you, and inspire you a little bit to step forward, right?
Absolutely. He said, why not try, right? Yeah. He didn't have to do that. So I really owe a lot to him. And also to that local community who really got behind it, that drove me to those practices in those early days when it wasn't, fancy. There wasn't a lot of notoriety around it. It was just like people coming together to support me in this journey.
That's well. Thank you for sharing that. And you've achieved success on so many different levels. That's just one of them. We're going to get to a couple others here too. So you've got a fascinating background. But thank you for sharing that. Yeah. This one is a question I like, and we talked a little bit about this. But you gave a TED Talk, and I think this is going to relate back to business. Yeah. About, I have to quote this, the insidious nature of lowered expectations. Yeah. Which you felt for a time growing up. And first, explain a little bit about what that is for folks who have not seen the TED Talks, and then come back and say, how are you fighting that every single day now, given your leadership position with your own team?
There is some literature you can, do some reading around this. The phrasing that's often used is called the phenomenon of lowered expectations. And it's where we look at the people around us, and particularly people from diverse backgrounds, people with disabilities. For me, obviously, having a visible disability as a wheelchair user, people of color, the LGBTQ plus community, really anyone who may come from a community that is somewhat marginalized in our society. And because of the inherent stigma and bias that's still there, it still sort of creeps in when we least expect it. And in many cases, especially in my lived experience around being a person with a visible disability, especially when I was younger, when people would look at me, they'd say, oh, that's so nice. Like, wow, look, she's out of her house. Look, oh, isn't it wonderful she's going to school? I bet maybe she can have a job someday, right? Like, that was the expectation. The expectation wasn't, maybe she can win a gold medal at the Paralympics someday, or be a doctor at Harvard someday, or, some of these other accomplishments. And people are, in many cases, really okay to stop there, right, without extending their thinking to think, okay, maybe that's where my implicit bias takes me in terms of what this person can achieve, but they don't keep going to say, well, what if I think beyond that, right? And what if I talk to them about what big dreams they may have and how we could facilitate those dreams, right? Yeah. So, and it is really an insidious thing. I think it does happen every day in our communities. It's often something that we don't really detect or think about until it gets called out. Right. And so that's why I chose that topic for the TED Talk, just because I feel like it's something that I think everybody can probably relate to in a way where, regardless of your background, some interaction you had or some relationship you had where the other individual may not have really been okay, like having lowered expectations and not pressing you. So because of my lived experience and having to frankly fight against that in many cases, it's a lens that I bring to pretty much everything I do, whether it's in sport or in medicine or as a parent now. And certainly there are some things that we can do to try to move beyond it, right? But it does take an intentionality. Sure, I think intentionally, like looking at the individual, having that direct conversation, getting to know them a little better, lifting the hood to say, like, if you could dream big, like, what would you want to do? Right. What would that look like? Yeah. And then not only asking the question, but also what would it take, right? And what barriers would need to be reduced, and how could we facilitate you taking those risks that are needed to get
encourage you to get there,
to get where you need to go. Because as we know, to achieve big things, we all take risks. That's part of it, right? It's okay to take those risks. It's okay if you fail along the way. Again, few people get to a big goal or a high achievement in life without failing along the way, right? So normalizing that, traveling with the person towards those big goals, and being the voice to say, like, no, I think they got it in them, right? And like communicating that to everyone else in the environment.
I know you're passionate about expanding opportunities for athletes in para and adaptive sports, as you said. So tell me about your work as the founding director of the Kelly Adaptive Sports Research Institute and the importance of creating access for competitors at all levels along the way.
Yes, absolutely. So, thanks for that question. So the Kelly Institute was really founded on the principle of thinking about the importance of understanding the impact of these programs. A lot of people think about para and adaptive sports as like a niche thing, like, we're going to start a track program to get young people who are wheelchair users into competitive racing, or we're going to start a wheelchair basketball team, that type of thing. But in reality, opportunities to adapt sport and physical activity actually can apply to a much broader swath of the population. Statistics show that over 25% of the adult U.S. population self-reports some type of disability, whether it's mobility or vision or hearing or cognitive. In older age groups, we know that achieving physical activity is extremely important for physical health, mental health, community participation. So we're trying to sort of move this concept of adaptive sports out of being this niche thing to saying that it's actually something that we should think about applying far more broadly across our communities. Right. Anytime you're thinking about facilitating physical activity in sports,
you're
keeping the collective in mind, and you're thinking about how to make that opportunity universally accessible to the broadest part of the community as possible. So at the Kelly Institute, what we've tried to do is to understand what can facilitate people getting involved, staying involved, what are the sticky factors, so to speak. Again, I'm sort of the quintessential example, young person, acquires a disability, wheelchair user, still a lot of life left to live, let's get involved in sports. But what if you're someone who's, 65 and you experience a stroke, right? And maybe have some speech difficulty or some mobility difficulty because of that. It's important for you to exercise too, right? Or what if you're someone who has some knee arthritis, right? And you used to enjoy running on the weekends. That's now harder. Have to pivot, have to think about how am I going to adapt my lifestyle to still be active? When we think about it in that way, then all of these opportunities really actually can have a pretty big impact from a public health standpoint.
Yeah, that's great.
Because right now the norm is something happens, you acquire a disability of some type, and there's an assumption you're done moving. Right.
Or you have to go search it out from somewhere, and it's not easily accessible anywhere. Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you. So let me switch gears on you. Last year, unfortunately, was the 10th year anniversary of the Boston Marathon bombing, a tragedy. I can remember distinctly where I was, and just such a incredibly tragic feeling for not just myself, but the whole city of Boston and the athletic community as a whole. And I do know the BAA has been integral to Boston's recovery in that, that you guys continue to inspire resiliency and unity throughout the city. Can you talk a little bit about that and the path you've gone down to help out there?
First and foremost, what happened that day was absolutely a tragedy, and we always seek to never forget, right, what happened in the way that the city came together. We never forget about the lives lost and the people directly impacted by that event. So I think always maintaining that historic perspective is very important. As we maintain that historic perspective, of course, we are moving forward. As the city has recovered and thought about, how do we come together as one Boston? How do we grow, continue to evolve? The BAA has also evolved over the past 10 years. Our mission's always been the same, actually, but be far more engaged in thinking about our role in the community, right? I think when people think about the BAA, the first thing that comes to mind is the marathon, of course. The marathon is one day of 365 days. And it is, of course, we're so proud, right? We, of course, think it's the world's best marathon. The energy, the excitement, the way in which literally the whole world comes together on Marathon Monday is extremely unique and extremely exciting. That said, we really, at the BAA, have found that we can really ride that wave of excitement and unity, right, and carry it forward the other 364 days of the year. And we do that by really leaning in and thinking about our focus on community impact. And that's where we've really grown the most in the last 10 years, certainly evolving and coming out of the tragedy of the marathon bombing, but also just because it's the right thing to do.
Right.
And because we now have the opportunity to do that, we have grown a lot of our organization. The resources have continued to grow, and we now can think bigger and give back. We now have a whole arm of the organization that thinks about that year-round community impact and thinking about how we really engage and facilitate our mission in the community, which is enhancing health through sport and particularly running, reaching all aspects of the Boston and even greater Boston community, getting more people in ways in which we're linking people and giving them an opportunity to get involved in sports. Yeah. And it's getting people, out into the community all around running, right? And really, again, riding that wave of excitement and the reputation that comes from the marathon, but bringing in a far more greater part of our community into that. Also directly supporting many community-based organizations through our small grants program. Right. Various running clubs, for example, other nonprofits doing great work that focus on like physical activity and how can we cross-support one another to enhance that overall mission of promoting health. Yeah. So we've become far more active in this space, and it continues to be one of our primary strategic goals, and will continue to grow.
And so we're going to stay on that a little bit, but this year's Boston Marathon right around the corner.
Yep.
And I am excited to see that Bank of America is sponsoring. So
we're thrilled.
We're now the sponsoring going forward. I am not going to run, or I'll
maybe
give you
this year.
Yeah, this year. Yeah. I'm good for 5 miles, but that's about it. So maybe just continue. How can partners like Bank of America, other companies, other institutions, how can they, work with you and your organization to help out? So just touch on a little bit of that for the folks who might be listening in here.
Yeah, so partnerships are absolutely critical. Like the more we can create effective partnerships with companies, certainly, obviously now with the B of A, our key partner, but even other community partnerships, corporate partnerships to really help that mission come alive, right? And so it could be thinking about the geographic reach of that mission, right? Like maybe it's thinking about if there's ways in which we can take those same principles and bring them to further out into the community or even other parts of the U.S. Thinking about, obviously, like resource generation, right? Like fundraising, philanthropy, ways in which we can bring more resources to this work and through that bring it to even more people. And obviously, even things around like brands and marketing, right? The mission and focus of B of A or Bank of America. And how does that align with our mission, and how do we find that synergy? And it's there, right? Right. And I think those are some of the ways in which we can make that come alive even more effectively.
That's great. At such a high-profile event, high athletic event, what is the one piece of advice you would give others when you're going to start and going to compete? What would you tell somebody who is just on their path to doing what you've achieved?
Sure.
Yeah.
One thing that worked for me was and this had to be framed correctly because you could overdo it a little bit, but it was helpful, especially for people around me that I trusted, for people to remind me to have fun along the way. Athletes take themselves very seriously and work very hard. And frankly, as you're approaching a big race like the Boston Marathon, sometimes that stress and anxiety can be pretty overwhelming, right? Like it's like a performance art, really, like any other big marquee moment where you have to step up and perform. And so a little bit of a reality check, a little bit of perspective setting can be helpful, right? It's I think, a healthy function and adaptation for athletes to be very linear in their thinking. Yeah. But if you get too linear, you can stop having fun and forget why you're there and forget to take a step back and understand how amazing all of this is. And then the other thing that really helped me, both in terms of keeping that perspective in place and something that also was very motivating to me, was always remembering that, like when we were at the start line of a race, whether it's here in Boston or any of the other marathon majors around the world, or even a smaller community-based marathon somewhere, in the U.S. or abroad, that just by being there, especially in the adaptive and para divisions for the wheelchair racers, like just by being there, we were changing mindsets, right, around disability, around what's possible. One of my favorite things was always, whether it was in a training run or in a race, when we'd go super fast, race by like a bunch of kids. And every once in a while, I remember those kids, I'd hear them as I'm zooming by, and they'd say, "That's awesome," right? Or what's that? Yeah. And their exclamation, their that raw excitement from especially young people seeing what we were doing.
Cool
very cool, very cool, right? And now that young person, from having just seen that one moment, right, that maybe one athlete, whether it's me or another athlete, is probably going to think differently, right, about what that means, who that athlete is, and what they're capable of.
Yeah.
And that really reframes so much of how we think about people with disabilities.
And that's got to give you tremendous inspiration while you're doing it too, right? Just to carry on and continue to go.
That's really what a lot of what kept me going over the years, right? I think when it came down to any individual marathon, I wanted to win, right? It was about like competing. But if you think about, all right, the season's done, you have, maybe 3 or 4 months till your next race. Like, what really keeps you going year after year after year?
You got to train all the way through, and you got to keep it going.
That's what one of the things that facilitated my longevity in the sport was knowing that we were changing the world.
Well, great, and a lot of different lessons there. I can already see this going. That sort of applying everything we're doing, both my personal life and my business life. So, thank you so much for sharing your story. And the Boston Marathon is just going to be fantastic. You guys are doing an awesome job. It's going to be amazing here. Can't wait for it. So, thank you for sharing the time before we get there. So, thank you.
Thanks, Dean.
All right.
Fun. Thank you.